Why does everybody love a rugged old action star kicking some bad guy butt? Is it a Hollywood thing, or is there actually a demand for this, like created by audiences? There's just something about an aged action star that people love seeing, and it doesn't appear to be going anywhere anytime soon. Most of the biggest action heroes on the planet are reaching retirement age these days, but that wasn't always the case. After all, a lot of these actors are the same guys we've been watching for decades. So where are all the new stars? How come they're few and far between? Do viewers love nostalgia, or does this have more to do with the movie industry betting on the same horse over and over again? Let's start by taking a look at the evolution of the action hero, and then maybe we'll have a better understanding of why they're all currently at an age where they're probably collecting a pension. When you look at the landscape of action stars today, you'll notice that a large majority of them were doing this back in like the 90s and even the 80s. They all sort of fit the same bill too. Tall, dark, square-jawed white guys. The majority of the biggest stars from the golden age of action movies came from backgrounds like bodybuilding or martial arts or something physical of the sort. They were rarely known first and foremost as trained actors. Flash forward to today, and the badass action hero has kind of been replaced by the superhero. The superhumans are everywhere these days, and it's important to remember that not all heroes wear capes. There's something a tad more enjoyable about rooting for a hero who isn't so bulletproof, who's, perhaps more relatable. For example, let's take a look at Bruce Willis's character from Die Hard, John McClane. The reason he was so beloved is because he's an everyman. For those who aren't familiar, McClane was an NYPD officer with very real issues and weaknesses. Bruce played the role with just enough grit and vulnerability to make the character bankable for decades to come. Of course, not every single protagonist of an action movie needs to feel like a down-to-earth, relatable, regular dude. There's a slightly different pleasure that comes from watching the uber-skilled people operate, like Keanu Reeves in John Wick, or Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, or even Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. Sometimes we just like to kick back and watch some truly absurd action that isn't even close to possible in reality. Despite the archetypes, it's undeniable that the middle-aged man is the standard for these types of roles. According to research by film blogger Stephen Follow, the average age of an action star in the year 2015 was 48 and a half, and it's safe to assume that number has only risen since then. 48 and a half years old, almost 50. To put that in perspective, the average age of an action hero in 2005, only 10 years prior, was 35 and a half. That's a mighty difference. That's 13 years. It's almost like the exact same crop of actors just stuck around and aged a decade, and they tossed in a few extra old guys to jack the number up. Remember the famous Danny Glover line in Lethal Weapon where he says, "I'm too old for this stuff"? Yeah, maybe Danny had a point. Perhaps this whole phenomenon is due to the fact that celebrity is now such an incurable condition. Once you get a taste of it, there's no getting off of it, so these fellas are just hooked to it like an IV drip. What are they if they're not emptying rounds on machine guns the same way they've been doing since their audiences were in diapers? What do you do when that ride is done? Just go home and find something else to do? Spend time with loved ones? I don't think so. It's probably not unlike a musician like Bob Dylan, who still continues to tour year-round and does 100+ shows around the globe every year, because what else is he gonna do? It's what he's been doing since the 1960s, so it's not like he can just stop on a whim. This is his life, much like Sylvester Stallone is probably always gonna punch out a foreign bad guy. It's not so easy to just stop. There's a whole bunch of big-name action stars who fall into this category. If you compiled a list of the top action stars in 1989, many of the same names would appear on the list of top action stars in 2019. The new Rambo movie is on the way, despite the fact that Sylvester Stallone is 67 years old. Arnold Schwarzenegger is 66, and he's still dropping Terminator one-liners. In fact, the entire cast of The Expendables falls into this category. Then there's Liam Neeson, whose appearance in the movie Taken was a late addition to this fraternity, but he's 61. At 58, Bruce Willis is kinda the baby of the bunch. Then there's Tom Cruise, who's been playing the role of the super spy Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible movies for 23 years. Then there's Keanu Reeves, who at 55 years of age has seen a sudden career resurgence with his work in the John Wick movie franchise. He starred in the action movie Speed in 1994. He's built up such a following that they're even making a fourth Matrix movie. All it took was waiting till his mid-50s for his career to really take off as an action star. It could be argued that the reason the old class is still in such control is because there was no new class who came up to usurp them. Who comes to mind when thinking about the new generation of action stars? The Rock is probably the biggest name in the world right now, but even he's 47 years old. That's not exactly a spry young up-and-comer. Jason Statham is another name that comes to mind, but he's 52 years old. As mentioned earlier, Liam Neeson is relatively new to this, but he's 61. Taken also kind of changed the game because he was introduced as an old guy. It wasn't like a long-standing series like Terminator or Rambo that seemed to defy the concept of time. This was a new thing, and they just showed him to us old. And he isn't the only one. There's a bunch of established actors who waited until later in their careers to jump into the action genre. Denzel Washington jumped into the game late, as did Sean Penn, and even Matt Damon, who at 45 jumped from doing movies like Good Will Hunting to pulling off stunts in the Bourne movies. And we haven't even touched on the actors who managed to pull off perhaps the most difficult transition of going from comedy to action. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is literally littered with them. There's Paul Rudd, Chris Pratt, Robert Downey Jr., Ryan Reynolds, all of which who would never have been considered for a typical action movie role in the 1980s, but are able to pull it off today. They prove that you can be silly and goofy and still pull off a full-fledged action star. Does this phenomenon have to do with a lack of new guys, or is it more about a love for the old guys? Is it just a result of the audience who grew up with these aging men and, turned into adults, and the movie studios are just catering to their tastes? It might just be as simple as that. It's the result of a if it ain't broke, don't try and fix it type of scenario, and Hollywood is just returning to the same money-making well that they know works. Perhaps it's a result of people's attachment to the past. The likes of Arnold, Stallone, and Bruce rarely launch any new projects these days. They're mainly just trotted out to deliver some of their greatest hits, by dropping a few popular catchphrases and maybe punching out a bad guy in a franchised sequel. They aren't trying to sell you anything new, only what they know you're gonna buy. And it makes sense, because movie audiences are changing, and more old people are going to the movies. According to research by the Motion Picture Association of America, the number of moviegoers aged 40 to 60 and over who went to the movies once a month or more recently jumped from 10.5 million to 13.7 million. Those people just want to see what they know and what they trust. They aren't interested in trying out new things or getting used to new faces. Let's face it, they can barely figure out a PVR. Or maybe this trend says something about the state of the modern man, and how the standard for what's the prime of a man's life has been moved up. After all, being middle-aged doesn't quite mean what it used to. They say that 50 is the new 40, and 40 is the new 30, and so on and so forth. Society is starting to see older dudes in a new light, as strong, heroic badasses, instead of frail, weak people who need to be protected. In fact, those Ironman marathons where you gotta run and bike and swim? Well, the average age of a male competitor is 43 and a half years old. And the average runner in their 40s finishes the London Marathon on average a full minute faster than a runner in their 20s. So maybe there's some merit to this trend of old action stars. Or it's possible that these assertive old men remind us of father figures, and that's why we're so attached. If you think about it, some of these men have been with us for so long and have taught us so many lessons and made so many valuable memories that they're sort of like surrogate dads. During a lot of people's formative years, it was these men who showed up time and time again to teach them valuable lessons on how to be a man, especially back when being a man meant big muscles and fighting villains and always getting the girl. Well, how do you feel about the stars of yesteryear who continue to be the stars of today year? That's not a saying. Do you love seeing a seasoned vet dangle off a helicopter? Or would you rather see someone new come along and take that spot? Let us know how you feel about the subject in the comments down below. Until next time, bye!